Prime Minister Scott Morrison has slapped down the New South Wales Liberal Environment Minister over his comments that federal Liberals were attempting to get the government to soften its position on climate change. Joining me now is political editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, what can you tell us about this latest internal stoush?
Well, it's just a latest episode in tension between the New South Wales government and the federal government, of course, both coalition governments. Now, the Environment Minister Matt Kean went on the Sharry program on Sky News last night and said that he'd heard from several federal MPs, even indicated a cabinet minister or two could be involved, who wanted stronger action on climate change from Scott Morrison. Let's hear what Matt Kean had to say.
My understanding is some of the most senior members of the government, and they're not moderates, they're from the right of the party.
In Cabinet?
And they are saying that this is a huge issue.
In Cabinet?
In Cabinet, absolutely. And can I just say, Sharry, I mean, this is because their communities are crying out. They're listening to the majority of people in their electorates that are saying, we want you to protect our environment, but we don't want you to do it in a way that's going to destroy our economy.
Now, as I understand it, Tom, he's talking about one moderate in Cabinet, and he is talking about a few MPs, but at the end of the day, my understanding from talking to people close to Scott Morrison over the past few weeks and even today is there's likely to be no change from the federal government on climate change, on the emissions reduction target or on carryover credits. It's simply not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is it's all very well that a few moderate Liberals are concerned about it, but what he's got to worry about more is the LNP, Queensland Nationals, who will actually leave the government over it if you went out too hard. And of course, he's only got a two-seat majority. So Scott Morrison, who was on 2GB just earlier saying some methods to tackle climate change include building dams and hazard reduction, he slapped down Matt Kean this morning. Let's hear that excerpt.
Matt Kean doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what's going on in the federal cabinet. Most of the federal cabinet wouldn't even know who Matt Kean was. And we are dealing with our climate policies in the same way as we took them to the election. We are beating and will meet and beat our emissions reduction targets.
Now, as I said, Queenslanders are harder to tackle on this issue. They are more likely to go. Basically, you'd rather take on your Andrew Bragg or your Dave Sharma on this issue than Matt Canavan, George Christensen and co. Micaiah Cash also had something to say on Matt Kean on your program this morning. Let's hear that.
Haven't been raised with me and are consistent with the Prime Minister. Don't know what he's talking about.
Not a discussion colleagues are even having informal?
Absolutely. I get the phone calls from colleagues who are representing small businesses and giving me the on-the-ground examples of what's actually happening. I have not had anybody phone me. We only won an election in May and the Australian people endorsed those policies.
So whatever might be happening off camera, Andrew, certainly there's no one on camera saying, hey, you know, let's increase our target, let's talk about this seriously. Even Karen Andrews, it should be pointed out, was just saying, let's stop debating it. She wasn't talking about increasing the target. I think the other interesting part about this is talking to someone today within the government was they were saying, look, even if we did increase the target, would we get any credit from Labor or the Greens? No. Wherever we went, they'd still say it was too low. So you'd have a lot of pain for possibly not a lot of gain.
Yeah, and so what the continued line has been over the last couple of weeks as this issue has flared up is we need to sell what we are doing better, because there's a belief, including in the Morrison office, that people don't know the government's doing anything at all on emissions reductions. And so clearly a few of those things they are doing in subsidising renewables projects, they believe they need to publicise a bit better to get the heat off somewhat.
Yeah, and you get to something like Snowy 2.0. The problem with that is, of course, it might well be synonymous with Malcolm Turnbull. So, look, that's the government side. Andrew, you spoke to Anthony Albanese yesterday. He had his own comments to make on a climate change target and where Labor might be headed on this. Yeah, kind of a good boxing match to try and pin him down, Tom. But essentially he's saying they'll announce a longer-term target first, and reporters were being briefed last night after our interview. That'll be a 2050 target, maybe zero net emissions by 2050, who knows. But he was saying that it was a mistake to go to the election with the policy they had in 2015 on 45% reductions from 2005 levels by 2030, because the needle had changed. And again, to set a 2030 target,
it would be difficult. He won't know for a couple more years because he wants to see what's happening with the actual emissions reduction level. So we're more likely to see a 2050 target first, then a 2035 target. I don't think that 2035 target will be as high as the Shorten target because Shorten got smashed over it. Let's hear what Anthony Albanese told us yesterday.
On climate change, for example, one of the things that we're likely to do is to announce a longer-term target before we announce, because by definition,
2050?
You're able
Zero
to
net
do
emissions,
that.
2050?
Well, we'll wait and we'll make our announcements at an appropriate time. Do an AFL analogy. It's a four-quarter game between 2019 and 2022. You're asking me how to play out, how it will play out in the final quarter. You've got to know what the three-quarter time score is. Frankly, I think it was a mistake in 2019 to continue to say, well, we'll do exactly what we're doing in 2015 as if it hadn't changed.
So, Tom, Albanese's tactic is to hold his nerve past the attacks from people like you and me and others in the community saying, where is your policy, mate? What are you actually doing other than carping and criticising? He clearly believes keeping policy back, doing it close to the election after the Shorten experiment is the way to go. So whatever we can get out of him at the moment is a win. The danger in that is you can end up looking like you don't stand for much. So that's the danger he's prepared to take on. Now, the other criticism or concern people have about Albanese is that he was originally in the left faction. And I guess there was a period where he was photographed 3 times in 14 months, as I put to him, with Jeremy Corbyn, who was very much a failed left experiment in Britain. Let's hear what he had to say about that. His type of politics isn't right for Australia or indeed for winning elections, is it?
No, it never was.
So you are not going to go anywhere near that sort of approach. You want to see a party of the centre-right, none of this left-wing stuff.
No, we're a party. The Labor Party is a centre-left party. And the Labor Party in Australia is very, very different from the British Labor Party and from its political frame.
Well, that'll be some relief, I guess, Andrew, that he's not going to go down that path, considering how it went down in the UK, of course. It'll be interesting to see on emissions if they both parties end up talking about 2050. I mean, I know we want vision from pollies, but, gee, that's a long way away to be making these alleged promises. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also facing question on the sports rorts scandal, and Bridget McKenzie this morning as well. It didn't seem like he was, totally on her. I mean, look, he was backing her in, but not sort of the sort of strong support. Yes, she hasn't done a thing wrong. He has to acknowledge this report, but at the same time was pushing back against any consequences.
Well, I thought Matt Kean actually did him a favour this morning, because otherwise it was going to be all sports rorts that we were all talking about. We're still talking about it, of course. Look, I think there's no doubt, because as I told you about last Thursday, we asked the Prime Minister's office whether the Prime Minister or his office were aware of the methodology by which the grants were being handed out, and we never got an answer. That the Prime Minister's office was probably involved at some level or had no idea what she was doing. I mean, the PM was out there kicking a footy all over the joint. So in that sense, it's very unlikely he'd can Bridget McKenzie. If he does, it's probably she's the kind of the sacrificial lamb to them all being involved with it. Now, what I've confirmed this morning is that the grants went through Cabinet, but what's been put to me is there wasn't discussion. There wasn't discussion about we're taking this approach with it. The appropriations have to go through Cabinet. But, yeah, I thought he was coming out with some talking points, thought over about 4 days, and he said exactly the same careful lines to every program. So you're right, there's a bit of wriggle room if further revelations come to light, but essentially he's backing her. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, I continue to support the Minister, but I also take very seriously the Auditor-General's report that was handed down, and we're acting on the recommendations that has come forward, and particularly to move quickly with the Attorney-General to clarify some of the legal issues that were raised. They went to seats right across the country. I mean, they went to Anthony Albanese's seat, they went to my seat, they went to Labor seats, they went to Coalition seats, they went to what were independent seats. They went right across the board, and the rules showed that the decision maker at the end of the day would be the Minister, and the rules were followed.
We discussed this report at length the other day, Tom, and the fact is that Bridget McKenzie was caught red-handed. The Auditor-General's office interviewed or took sworn testimony from 2 of her staff, and there was a list of marginal and targeted seats when they handed out the grants. This doesn't pass any test, let alone a pub test. And the fact is, what happens now really is obviously up to the PM, but it's a matter of what sort of media and community pressure and opposition pressure is brought to bear. It could well go away, but the government's taken a hit over it. It depends what happens the next couple of weeks, particularly when Parliament resumes.
And, you know, you could get a situation as well where perhaps communities come forward and we start hearing about the projects that missed out. I noticed this morning you had the Prime Minister keen to talk about worthy projects that got funding from this. This seems to be, you know, cherry picking, but, you know, you can go to other projects that didn't get funding and how bad that'll look. Just as well, Andrew, you mentioned there it goes through Cabinet, but what do we know about the detail? I mean, presumably they weren't each going through individual grants, given we've had a whole lot of different grants here. So
look,
it's just a sort of broad tick and flick.
Tom, the first suggestion I had this morning was there'd been some discussion. I've spoken to a couple of people since and apparently there was no discussion. It would have been very interesting if there was some in terms of, oh, you know, we can go to these electorates with this and that, but no. But the issue, I think, is you're not going to see a minister take this approach without PMO knowing. It just doesn't happen.
Well, as you say, we will see in the coming days further pressure, no doubt. Parliament resuming not too far as well. Andrew Clennell, thank you.
Thanks.